In the early Middle Ages, when most of Europe was collapsing into chaos, when Roman roads were breaking apart and cities were turning into ruins, a group of refugees fled into a muddy lagoon on the edge of the Adriatic Sea. There was no farmland, no fresh water, no stone, and no safety from the sea. Just mud, salt, and shallow water. And yet, from that unlikely place, a city would rise that would dominate trade, politics, and war across the Mediterranean for nearly 1,000 years. This is the story of Venice, the city that turned water into an empire. To understand Venice, you have to begin with fear. In the 5th and 6th centuries, the Western Roman Empire had fallen. Waves of invasions swept across Italy, Visigoths, Ostrogoths, and later the Lombards. Cities were sacked, farms destroyed, and people fled wherever they could find safety. Many of them escaped to the Venetian lagoon, a marshy stretch of islands protected by shallow waters that large armies could not easily cross. At first, these refugees did not plan to build a great city. They built wooden huts on stilts driven into the mud. They lived by fishing, collecting salt, and trading small goods. It was a hard life, but it was safe. And in a time of constant war, safety was everything. What these early settlers did not realize was that their new home, though poor in land, was rich in opportunity. The lagoon sat at a perfect crossroads between east and west. To the east was the Byzantine Empire, wealthy, urban, and connected to the trade routes of Asia. To the west was Europe, fragmented, poor, but full of raw materials and growing populations. Venice, sitting between them, would become the middleman. And being the middleman is often the most profitable position in the world. By the 8th century, Venice was still technically under the control of the Byzantine Empire, but it was far away from Constantinople, and distance meant independence. The Venetians began electing their own leader, called the Doge. He was not quite a king, but not just a mayor either. He ruled, but his power was carefully limited by councils and laws. Venice was not a monarchy like most European states. It was a republic, run by wealthy merchant families. This would become one of Venice's greatest strengths. While other kingdoms were ruled by warrior nobles who cared about land and battles, Venice was ruled by merchants who cared about trade, ships, and money. Their wars were fought for ports and trade routes, not for farmland. Venice did not want to conquer the world. Venice wanted to control its trade. And to control trade, you need ships. The Venetian arsenal became one of the most important places in the medieval world. It was a massive shipyard, but more than that, it was something like an early factory. Workers specialized in different parts of shipbuilding, and ships could be assembled incredibly fast for the time. Some historians say Venice could build a fully equipped war galley in a single day, using assembly line methods centuries before the Industrial Revolution. With ships, Venice controlled the sea. With the sea, Venice controlled trade. And with trade, Venice became rich beyond imagination. Venetian merchants traded in salt, grain, timber, slaves, spices, silk, and precious metals. They sailed to Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and later to ports across the Black Sea. Spices from India and Southeast Asia passed through Venetian hands before reaching Europe. Silk from China, pepper from India, and gold from Africa all flowed through Venice. And every time goods passed through Venetian ships or ports, Venice took a cut. Money poured into the city. Marble palaces rose from the water. Churches were covered in gold mosaics. Venetian glass became famous across Europe. The city that began as a swamp of wooden huts became one of the richest places in the world. But wealth brings enemies. Venice's greatest rival was another maritime city, Genoa. Unlike Venice, Genoa was on the western side of Italy and the two powers competed for control of Mediterranean trade routes. For centuries, Venice and Genoa fought a series of brutal naval wars. These were not just small battles. Entire fleets were destroyed, thousands of sailors captured, and fortunes lost overnight. At times, it seemed Genoa might destroy Venice completely. The worst moment came in 1379, during the War of Chioggia. Genoese forces sailed deep into the Venetian lagoon and captured the town of Chioggia, just south of Venice itself. For the first time in centuries, the enemy was at the doorstep. Venice was on the verge of collapse. The government took desperate measures. They called back every ship, every sailor, every resource. Even old men and boys were armed to defend the city. The Venetians blocked the lagoon, trapping the Genoese fleet. Slowly, through starvation and constant attack, they forced the Genoese to surrender. It was a turning point. After the War of Chioggia, Genoa never fully recovered, and Venice became the dominant naval power in the Mediterranean. But Venice's most famous and controversial moment came earlier, during the Fourth Crusade. In 1204, European crusaders planned to sail to the Holy Land to fight Muslim powers. They needed ships, and Venice agreed to build them and provide them for a price. But when the crusaders couldn't pay, the Venetians offered them a different deal: help Venice attack its enemies, and the debt would be forgiven. What followed shocked the world. Instead of sailing to the Holy Land, the Crusaders, guided by Venetian interests, sailed to Constantinople, the greatest Christian city in the world. In 1204, they attacked and sacked it. Churches were looted, treasures stolen, and the Byzantine Empire was shattered. Venice gained enormous wealth and territory from this event: ports, islands, and trade privileges across the eastern Mediterranean. It was one of the most profitable political deals in history. But it also showed something important about Venice. Venice was not driven by religion like many medieval powers. Venice was driven by strategy and profit. If a crusade could be turned into a business opportunity, Venice would do it. For centuries, Venice built a maritime empire. Not a land empire like Rome, but a network of ports, islands, and coastal cities. Places like Crete, Cyprus, and many Aegean islands came under Venetian control. These locations acted like stepping stones across the sea, allowing Venetian ships to travel safely and dominate trade routes. This was the Venetian Empire, an empire of water. Inside the city, Venice developed a complex political system designed to prevent any one person from taking too much power. The Doge was watched by councils. Councils were watched by other councils. The famous Council of Ten acted almost like a secret police, protecting the state from conspiracies. Venice valued stability above all else, because stability protected trade, and trade protected wealth. Venice became known as La Serenissima, the most serene republic. And for centuries, it worked. While kingdoms rose and fell, Venice remained rich, stable, and powerful. When the Mongols opened trade routes to Asia, Venice grew richer. When European demand for spices increased, Venice grew richer. When other cities fought land wars, Venice controlled the sea and grew richer. But no empire lasts forever. The beginning of Venice's decline came not from war, but from geography changing in a way they could not control. In 1498, a Portuguese explorer named Vasco da Gama sailed around Africa and reached India by sea. This new route allowed European powers to trade directly with Asia without going through the Mediterranean. Suddenly, Venice was no longer the middleman between East and West. And when you are a middleman, losing the trade route means losing everything. At the same time, a new power was rising in the East, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans captured Constantinople in 1453 and began expanding across the eastern Mediterranean. Slowly, they took many of Venice's colonies and trade bases. Venice fought several wars against the Ottomans, sometimes winning battles, but gradually losing territory and influence. The world was changing. Trade was moving to the Atlantic. New powers like Spain and Portugal, and later the Netherlands and England, began dominating global trade. Venice, once the center of the world's trade network, became just another regional power. By the 1700s, Venice was no longer a great empire, but it was still rich, beautiful, and culturally important. It became famous for art, music, and architecture. Tourists, nobles, and artists visited the city for its beauty and festivals. Then, in 1797, Napoleon Bonaparte arrived. For over 1,000 years, Venice had survived invasions, wars, and political crises. But Napoleon ended the Venetian Republic without a major battle. The last Doge surrendered, and the republic that had lasted more than a millennium was gone. It was a quiet end for one of history's greatest powers. But Venice's story is not really about its fall. It is about how it survived and ruled for so long in the first place. Venice succeeded because it understood something many other powers did not. Control the trade, not the land. Build networks, not just armies. Use geography as a weapon. Stay politically stable. Think long-term. Venice turned a swamp into a superpower. Venice turned ships into an empire. Venice turned trade into dominance. For nearly 1,000 years, this city of wood and water stood at the center of the Mediterranean world, proving that power does not always come from vast armies or huge territories. Sometimes, power comes from knowing where the money flows and placing your city right in the middle of it. And even today, when you walk through Venice and see its palaces rising from the water, you are not just looking at a beautiful city. You are looking at the remains of one of the most successful trade empires in human history. A city that mastered politics, economics, and geography so well that it ruled the Mediterranean for a millennium.